Welcome back to Animal Crossing New Horizons. I'm dear darling. Should we see what's going on our lovely island of Fawnhallow today? Late night episode because of D&D session today. What my 5 minutes about D&D? It was pretty nice actually. Like in like a surprisingly wholesome way. Well, maybe not surprisingly. Because I guess the setting was setting up for that. What should I talk about, I suppose, in these 5 minutes? I will say one random thing, which I also didn't know, is apparently the Bad Guys is getting a sequel. I haven't even seen the first Bad Guys, despite the fact that I've heard it's very good. And I think its art style is actually pretty cool, but apparently it was popular enough to get a second one, so fair enough, I don't know. Good evening, everyone. Right now in Fawnhallow, it's 11:21 PM on Thursday, January 30th, 2025. Is it going to be any good? Honestly, don't even know what the critical reception was on the first one. Critical, review, just, I see a lot of fan art, but unsurprisingly, people love that wolf guy. So presumably, I don't know, it's captured, some people's hearts. But anyway, not the point. The point is, D&D, what should I talk about? I'm trying to think, because I definitely don't want to spoil things in case I accidentally, talk about spoiler, but I don't think there are any spoilers. Sure, how much? But yeah, basically the premise is that the group, which I usually call the chaotic group, but I think the lines are definitely blurred in which group is the chaotic group now. So group 1, group 2, this was group 1. Yeah, surprisingly unchaotic, I suppose, all things considered. They are essentially at an orphanage. It's to do with one of the characters' backstories, kind of. This is a thing I was actually thinking about a lot recently, because I saw a thread on it to do DMing. I can't remember the exact details, but they were just players. It was something along. It was some sort of meme along the lines of players not being engaged or whatever with the story that you built. And I was thinking to myself, being I've never really had that issue. For one, I feel like there's an unwritten agreement between my players, and I probably said something along the lines in session 0, being obviously I can only prepare for what makes sense. While this is a collaborative storytelling experience, there is a certain expectation that you are not going to completely subvert my expectations for the sake of it. We have an unwritten agreement that we'll try and at least be fair to each other. We play the stories. Where it basically pans out to in the macro scale, they are following the story arcs that I intended, that I planned, but it's more on the medium and the micro scale is where they put their own flavour on exactly how that story goes. And honestly, sometimes on the macro scale, it changes a lot. And like I said this before, and I've told the players as well, that in group 2, one of the NPCs, the way I planned it in my head was this character was going to die. They were going to get executed, and that would trigger a lot of the coming act. But then they played it smart, and then they basically saved him. So I was like, okay, you should be rewarded for that. He's not just going to randomly die now just for the sake of it. We'll make it work, because he doesn't have to die. But there has to be something still to justify how he's alive, kind of. So that's kind of how it went. But yeah, I forgot where I was going with this. But I was reflecting on it because I was well, I think probably also a big reason that the players are invested, I suppose, in the story arc is each of the campaigns, they have one major story arc which kind of involves all of them, but that's something which they discover along the way. But then they have their own character story arcs, which I basically use to point towards the main story arc as well. I'm sure, some of my players could stand up and be hey dear darling, I don't really believe the campaign, I can't suspend my disbelief for it. How do we keep coincidentally running into characters who have some relevance in one way or another to the backstory, to someone's backstory in the campaign? And the obvious answer is because, that is what is interesting, right? I think how anticlimactic would be if I make you, introduce a character, and then you get invested in this character and that sort of thing, and then find out they have no relevance and no buy-in to this character story whatsoever. Sure, that's fine for every other, some characters here and there, but for every character it would be just one, it would be the most realistic, but two, would also be boring as sin. You'd be chasing down one character story, and then you'd have zero progression on your character story for the entire arc, which is not something I want. I want these characters' arcs to be intermingled one way or another. So I think of ways to at least bring up some relevance here and there, even if it's not the most prominent feature of it. both the story arcs right now are focusing more on one character as like the main central driving point, but each of the other characters have like small incidental things here and there which will bring in parts of it, not bring it into the spotlight, but bring in something that they need to consider and think about. I'm sorry, I stopped your singing, but something that they need to consider and see how they personally will react to it. So yeah, that I'm just like, that is a very thankful thing that my players are interested in the characters in that way, right? And that, you know, it certainly takes some of it a bit of a stretch to be able to fit the characters in, but you know, in those situations you can just do dream sequences, which is what I do. Although to be fair, I don't do as many dream sequences now because we're further into the game, and you know, I don't like having just solo moments, which brings me on to my next point, which was a very challenging thing in this campaign and in a lot of the campaigns, but especially this session, is splitting the party. I see it's a thing that people say all the time that they don't like to split the party as a DM because, like, come on, you're all there together, do the same thing. But I see it from perspective of, this is a collaborative storytelling experience. I think if it makes sense for you to split the party, but you have to realise that if you do so, unwritten, very obvious rule probably is the fact that you are cutting all of your times collaboratively, you know. That's reduced time that you will personally get to interact with it. Like if you, in this case, in this session, they all split up in 4 different directions. Not completely different directions, they're all in the same space, but they're doing 4 different things, which means that I had to, you know, I can't in parallel DM all 4 conversations at once, so I had to go one by one. And, you know, that obviously leads to the thing where basically you can think of it as they're kind of cutting their session time into quarters. But it's more like they're cutting their active session time into quarters, I suppose. They're still like watching and engaging and can listen in to the other conversations and reflect and make funny comments about it. And to a certain extent, that is better as well, because I think for most people it'll probably be really exhausting doing 3 hours straight of active roleplay all the time. You know, that's why in conversations people take turns, etc. Right? That's why there's some focus here and there. You know, that's why it goes back and forth. I don't mind doing it as a DM, but again, I'm a DM. I've kind of signed up for that, and it's less so much improv roleplay. It's more like, you know, puppeteering, if anything. But it's a very challenging thing when they split up in 4 different directions and then having to split up the conversations between them, because there's a lot of emotional whiplash, a lot of character growth actually in this session, surprisingly. Seeing different sides of the characters, like one of the characters started, like, they were basically, the long and short of it is, they're at an orphanage, which is relevant to one of the characters' backstories and not relevant to the others. But again, as I said before, all the NPCs I introduce have some relevance. Not relevance in a way that like they're necessarily intertwined with their backstories in that way, but they can shed some light or some clarity, or in some way be able to progress someone's character story in some ways, which I think is a way to do it. Because if, like, for example, I have this NPC who like relates to one character's backstory, not in a way that they're like from the character's backstory, but like, oh, they've experienced a similar thing and they can shed some more light on that situation from their own experience. Yeah, that's cool. That it gives a way for that character's story to be advanced. But it also, I suppose now I'm sort of thinking about it out loud, gives the other characters who are not related or get nothing from this character's backstory to basically just interface them as basically a random person, right? So it sort of ticks the boxes of being able to have the suspension of disbelief of, oh, I'm just meeting a random person, to be honest, as you would on an adventure, but also like you take turns on who the random NPC might be relevant for. And sometimes they don't even discover why that NPC could be relevant to them. And I don't mean relevant as in they're from the backstory, but relevant as in maybe they can shed some light on someone's situation, or they can also relate and empathize, or they might, I don't know, be able to, their opinions on it might vastly differ, and thus give a different sort of perspective and challenge the character in some way. That's what I mean. And sometimes those come up organically in a way that I didn't exactly predict. But yeah, splitting a party into 4 is very, very challenging because, as I said, there's a lot of emotional whiplash, because there's like one character who was basically training up these kids, being like, yeah, you know, you want to be an adventurer, come on, I'll show you how to do it. It's all about, you know, doing stuff like this. I'll teach you some sort of my like techniques I learned. Another character having a very like heartfelt sort of reunion with some people, some, you know, friends almost family you might consider, or they haven't seen for a while, and then like having a very sad emotional moment, knowing that it's not going to last forever. And then another character going on their own discovery, basically being like, learning that not everything needs to be so transactional in nature. Sometimes, people want to help others for the sake of helping others. And then another character is going and like investigating something to do with this like overarching plot of what's going on, and getting more questions and answers, because there are some weird things which are being revealed about them through other characters, and it's a very complicated interwoven web of things. And I feel like in the moment, and certainly when this first started with the splitting party, it's very easy to sort of fall into the thing of being like, am I all the players having a good time? They're basically like taking turns sitting there, just sort of spectating for 3/4 of it, and then participating actively for 1/4. But on the same point is like, this is something we, it's been brought up before, and it's established, and they all signed up for it. I very clearly asked them, being like, where are you going to go? Are you going to split up? Or you're not going to split up? And they know the consequences of that. If they're okay with it, then I'm okay with it, essentially. To kind of like sort of break my mind a little bit, when they basically went into the sort of dining room area, because it started off with dinner, essentially, where they could meet all the other like kids in the orphanage, essentially, and also speak more with the caretaker, I don't know what you would call the person who's the head of the orphanage. I guess the head of the orphanage. And basically I set them up on different tables to be like, oh yeah, you can choose where you want to sit, who you might want to talk to, who like sparking your curiosity, because they've heard like little bits and pieces about them. And then they all sat on like 4 different tables, and I was like, oh my god, we're really in the deep end now immediately. So yeah, it's a lot of balancing back and forth, and there's a lot of like keeping track of conversations in your head and trying to sort of find ways that they can sort of tie together, being like, oh, they're in the same space, so you can see this part happening, or maybe you might have a reflection on this, or maybe you can hear part of this story also happening. It's very cool, and it was just meant to be like a sort of bite-sized story arc, I suppose, a bit of a break as well. From this campaign, like, while this is certainly still in the continuous story act of Act 2 and has relevance to it, this is like a different change of pace from the much more intense other parts that have occurred so far. So yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, splitting a party, very, very wild, difficult thing to get the balance right. But again, if it's a sort of thing which your players are okay with, then I suppose there's no harm, no foul, right? Yeah, but honestly, what I can say is it turned out to be a much more wholesome episode than I expected, a wholesome session than I expected, because obviously I did plan this sort of session thing, and I was like, this could be like a big part of this character arc, even if the party doesn't choose to stay here for that long, or whatever they end up choosing to do, I've got to at least set some groundwork and like put some interesting things in here to get a little bit of intrigue going. So it was like, okay, let's make all these characters or whatever, and then, turns out the party got here, and then it's like, oh, we probably aren't going to stay for that long, and I was like, okay, fair enough. And I will fully admit that I was just like, I guess, that's fair. This is like so tied in with one of the character specific arcs that I shouldn't be surprised if the other characters are not as interested in them. Even though there is, again, as I say, there's a little bit of bait on all the characters in the way that, yes, there can be something interesting, you just kind of had to find it. Sometimes I'll drop hints about it, and then if you're paying attention, you'll pick up. And my players are getting pretty good at picking up on the hints I'm putting down, so I guess I need to get more subtle with them. But I also think that's okay, the level of hint dropping that I give. Because I think it's very much in the stage of, there are a lot of questions about things, but finding the answers is the difficult part. And I don't know all the questions my players have, but I do know most of them, probably. And at least all the questions I think they do all have answers. And that will be the difficult part of figuring out. Some of them will probably take the entire campaign to figure out, because they might be quite difficult or very entrenched in things, and some things that they have no conceivable way of knowing anything about the answer now, because it's not been foreshadowed, or like the things that they need to do to trigger some investigation or hints about it have not been met. That's totally fine. It would be a shame if we get to the end of a campaign and the mysteries are not solved, I suppose, in that sense, but they will be, probably. So yeah, I was surprised at how wholesome it was. you know, like one of the players like training up the other characters and like being like, this is what it you could be like an adventurer, and having a small like heart to heart about what it is, you know, moving out and leaving your family, I suppose, behind. Another one have like learning about this like human connection, where two people who are learning to connect with a very standoffish sort of person eventually as well, and sort of empathizing and helping their situation. And again, another very, very sort of like heart-wrenching reunion in a sense, which I like to throw in sad scenes here and there, because I'm like, you know, lives are full of happy and sad moments. I suppose they can make for joyful moments, because it's difficult, I think, to go into it like as a player and be like, I'm going to invoke a sad moment between everyone, right? But I think it's easier as a DM, because like as a player you're sort of like, oh, it's going to like kill the vibe of a party. But I'm like, oh, I'm a DM, I can control what vibe is like, you know. I don't care if it makes you angry. If it makes you sad, then boom, I'm invoking right emotion. Be angry at my villains, be sad at these touching moments, and be happy in the celebratory moments afterwards as well. It just was a lot of emotional whiplash going back and forth between each of the little things going on. Thankfully they were all in the same area, but yeah, definitely not the first time that the party's been split. And I think that's also, on reflection, not something which will work for every group. Some groups will probably be like, yeah, we should probably just do everything together, because I don't want to sit here not doing anything for ages. But again, that's up to each and every group to decide for themselves. And, you know, so be it. Just is pretty difficult to DM in a great challenging way. Like I don't mean it in a way of like, oh, I hope my players stop doing this. I think it's great fun to be able to try and do that as well, and try and sort of figure out exactly what sort of things should be said, trying to keep track of it all. I think the hard part is switching back and forth between voices, especially when they're character voices which I've like not practiced or like can't do. One of my players has chosen like an Irish accent for their characters, for their character, and that obviously means that like the families of his character also should probably have like Irish accents as well. And I was just like, god damn, I can't do an Irish accent. Not consistently as well. The only thing I know is like I becomes like oi, and R sounds become like R sounds or something like that. I mean, you just do it in sing-songy, and then half the time I do it, it slips into Scottish, and I'm like, whatever. Just roll with it. It would be brilliant if I was Matt Mercer, but alas, I am not. To be able to pull off all those voices separated and convincingly. But also, I've only got so much time, I can't practice all the voices, eh? Yes. I don't know what I was going to say. Splitting a party. Terrible idea in Scooby-Doo. Maybe an idea in D&D if it works for your party, and then otherwise, I don't know. It's up to you. Cover more ground, I suppose, that way. So on it, what other sort of YouTube channel updates I was going to give is, I haven't recorded the new series yet. I've not finished the thumbnail art for it. Again, time has been pretty tight recently. I will try and finish it, the thumbnail art today, and maybe a little bit on Saturday. I will probably record the new series on Friday. So it's not going to go up on Friday, it's going to go up on Saturday. We're pushing it one day, just because I haven't had time to really do it. Thankfully, the thumbnail art is actually quite simplistic art style. It's definitely a strange one, because it's not one which translates very well to the thing I do with the dressing up in costume, but I think I've done okay with it so far. But on that note, I'm going to round this episode off here. So, if you have been watching, thank you very much. It's been Animal Crossing New Horizons. I've been Dear Darling. Likes, comments, subscription, shares, greatly appreciated. Socials, Discord down below. Hope to see each other again, but for now, it's our farewell. So until next time, bye-bye for now.